just 18 to 20 humans, but unlike humans, that waste won't be processed and isolated from the environment. In 2004, cattle accounted for 58% of nitrates released into the environment, and in 3 countries, pig waste is estimated to contribute more to pollution than human waste. A report to the FDA stated that, all in all, 10 times more waste is generated by livestock than humans. So this becomes an issue because nitrate and phosphorus are integral to cell life to grow, and generally is what limits how much it can grow. But these also readily dissolve in water. All of the excess runoff that livestock are causing by compacting the dirt is also filled with fertilizer and manure, which is full of nitrates and that phosphorus. When it returns, it then washes into our river and slowly seeps down into our water tables, contaminating our well water. International regulations for nitrate levels recognize up to 10 milligrams of nitrate per liter of water as safe for human consumption, and that levels over 10 milligrams per liter can cause miscarriage, blue baby syndrome, infant poisoning, and stomach cancer. In Europe, 22% of water under cultivated land is found to have nitrate levels above the safe limits. In the US, 1.4% of Americans drink water from wells with nitrate above the safe limits. One study in Delaware tested 200 groundwater wells and found that near livestock farms, nitrate levels averaged over twice the limit. But near corn farms was about half the limit, and in the woods, it's naturally about a 20th of the limit. Another study found similar results in the UK, and it's been reported that removing nitrate from drinking water costs about $2.50 per gallon and ends up costing the UK $30 million a year. Here in Tempe, I looked it up, our nitrate levels are 6.3 milligrams per liter. So it's under the safe limit of 10 milligrams per liter. But in Queen Creek, it's 8.8%, or 8.8 milligrams per liter. And in Queen Creek, there's more cattle farms. In my suburban home in New Jersey, or hometown, the nitrate levels are half as low as here in Tempe. And although nitrate levels are range in Tempe, it's well documented that nitrate levels spike after it rains. Once it rains, it brings all that soil into the rivers, and until that washes down, we're going to be drinking it. So you may have actually noticed that the canals will start to turn green in the monsoon season. That's actually algae that's growing nonstop off the excess nitrate that washed out from manure upstream. This phenomenon doesn't occur just in Arizona's canals. Algal blooms happen around the world because of excess fertilizer that washes into our water system, providing a free buffet of phosphorus and nitrate for algae to grow on. The satellite picture off the Gulf of Mexico highlights the extent of the algae growth from fertilizer that washes down the Mississippi River. Again, this is algae that grows from fertilizer that washes down the Mississippi. That's what all that's highlighting. And similar occurrences happen off the coast of Brazil, China, the UK, Australia, India, pretty much everywhere there's livestock. Algae blooms aren't harmless either. Some algae will release poison, and the same conditions that allow for algae growth also allow for other poisonous microorganisms. Last year, an algae bloom on Lake Erie cost 500,000 Ohioans to lose drinking water because it became poisonous and undrinkable. And that's not the only problem. Algal blooms aren't just bad for humans either. While algae growth is normal and healthy for an ecosystem, when nutrients that are usually available only in limited supply become highly available, algae will continue to grow until they run out of another necessary resource. And often, that other necessary resource will be oxygen that's dissolved in the water. Dead zones, as shown here, can occur because fish also rely on water oxygen. So all these fish died because algae grew, and they grew because of fertilizer. All the algae, they breathed in all the oxygen, and then the fish had nothing to breathe, so they just died. And this happens every year by the billions.
So what would you say to somebody who says, oh, I'm, eating different animals like pigs, cows, and chickens is really bad? Would you say that eating fish is equally bad because of all the contaminants in the water?
There's, the question of mercury poisoning and other heavy metal poisoning. I don't really go into that, but basically they'll end up concentrating all those heavy metals, a lot of which do come from animal agriculture, and then when we eat them, we, get that whole load. they're also concentrating the nitrate, so you're getting that. It's not good. So dead zones, they all occur from fertilizer, and the whole process is called eutrophication. Nitrogen and phosphorus aren't the only nutrients that are used in the livestock industry, though. As I was just saying, heavy metals are also added to feed to boost production, and only 5 to 15% of those heavy metals are actually absorbed by livestock. So they end up in the manure, and they end up washing down into our water eventually.
So I'm sorry, the heavy metals are added to feed, animal feed to produce, to increase something?
To increase their production, it's basically the feed doesn't necessarily have everything that the cow or any sort of livestock might need, so they'll add it, usually in excess, just so they'll grow that much faster. Yeah, so all those heavy metals will end up in the environment, and they'll accumulate in the soil. They'll penetrate into our water tables and wash out into our rivers as chemical contaminants. But heavy metals in livestock, it's actually not that big of a deal because it's totally eclipsed by other industries which dominate and poison the earth, such as electronics manufacturing. I'm sure we've all heard of the Motorola plant. But chemical treatments are used heavily in the tanning industry, where leather is made. 80 to 90% of the world's tanneries now use toxic chromium-3 in their tanning processes. To process 1 ton of rawhide, about 5 kilograms of chromium, 170 kilograms of chloride, 6 kilograms of disulfur, and 75 kilograms of sulfate are used and then washed away. For water resources surrounding a tannery, this represents a high environmental threat unless the chemicals are disposed of properly. However, in most developing countries where we outsource the majority of our leather production, tannery effluent is disposed of by sewer and discharged to inland surface water or irrigated land. Improper practices don't just occur in the developing countries, though. In 2009, Erin Brockovich helped file a lawsuit in Missouri, which was eventually settled for tens of millions of dollars. It was found that the people of Missouri were getting sick from extremely toxic chromium-6 poisoning, which came from fertilizer, the same chemical Erin Brockovich found in her landmark 96 case. The reason the fertilizer contained the extremely toxic chromium-6 was because the fertilizer was partially made from the leftover toxic sludge that was bought from local tanneries, which is a common and accepted practice. Literally, they'll use toxic chemicals, process the animal's skin, make leather, take all that's left over, all the hair and everything else that's just gotten rid of from leather, and all those chemicals, and they'll add it to fertilizer, just because it's cheap.
And that's supposed to
So
that's supposed to benefit the fertilizer?
Yeah, so all the hair and the fat and everything that's taken off the skin, that ends up in that sludge as well. So the idea is all that kind of still has the nutrients, the nitrates and the phosphate, and so they'll mix it in with fertilizer and they'll supposedly put it at such a low concentration that all these toxic chemicals, won't be a problem.
But they are.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's shown, for example, in the one case with that was in Missouri. Another class of contaminants from livestock production are antibiotics. On most factory farms, antibiotics are constantly added to feed at all times at low doses. It's called non-therapeutic usage to help prevent the livestock from getting sick. The reason livestock are under constant threat of getting sick is because they're so stressed and confined on factory farms that relatively minor diseases turn into epidemics. For example, over the past 2 years in America, porcine epidemic diarrhea has spread rapidly in farms where pigs are confined to cages so small that they can't even turn around for their entire lives. The disease spreads because the animals end up wallowing in their own diarrhea, and their piglets then become infected. This occurred on such a large scale in America that pork prices raised to the point where restaurants like Chipotle stopped carrying pork for a while. Which begs the question, why are Chipotle's pigs getting so sick if Chipotle supposedly follows humane practices? Antibiotics are also used for livestock, and ends up accounting for half of total antibiotic consumption in the US, and 80% of that is non-therapeutic. The World Health Organization has even called for a ban on giving healthy animals antibiotics. The reason for this is antibiotic resistance. For example, you've probably heard of MRSA, which originates in hospitals, where bacteria can spread from patient to patient who are each given antibiotics. Every time a patient takes an antibiotic, a large portion of the bacteria in the person will be killed off, at which point their immune systems will take over and finish the job. This doesn't always occur though, and any bacteria that are left over are more resistant to the antibiotic. This is called a selection pressure, and it's the driving force for evolving antibiotic resistance. Bacteria also freely share genes between species. So once a harmless bacteria evolves and becomes antibiotic resistant, it can then share those genes with other harmful bacteria. And once a deadly bacterium gets those genes, it becomes what's called a superbug, like MRSA. This process is what occurs when animals are also constantly fed low amounts of antibiotics, and is why we now see strains of antibiotic-resistant Salmonella and E. coli. That's E. coli, by the way. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria aren't the only contagions bred by livestock. Livestock increase the amounts of Campylobacter, which can cause deadly diarrhea. Water contamination by livestock has been directly attributed, causing deaths from Campylobacter. The main cause of the 73,000 yearly E. coli infections has been linked to cattle contaminating water. Salmonella is found in about 50% of chickens. Giardia and Cryptosporidium are microbes found in many animals and cannot be removed by water treatment. And on average, 1 to 5% of people in developed countries are infected with Giardia or Cryptosporidium. And in developing countries, that can be as high as 20%. In 2002, the U.S. Geological Survey found antibiotics in 48% of the streams they sampled across the nation, and considered livestock and manure used as fertilizer to be the cause. And then finally, the last class of chemical water contaminants caused by livestock production are hormones. Hormones are used to increase and accelerate livestock growth, and commonly used ones include estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, zeranol, L-ingestrol acetate, and trenbolone acetate. As far back as 1977, it was known that 50% of progesterone fed to cattle is excreted onto the land, and that the testosterone readily washes out into our waterways. However, no negative direct impact on human health has actually been scientifically proven from hormone use, actually getting into our water from this process, but the FDA, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, states that the links between livestock use of hormones and associated environmental impacts is not easily demonstrated. Nevertheless, it would explain wildlife showing developmental, neurologic, and endocrine alterations even after the ban of known estrogenic pesticides. This supposition is supported by the increasing number of reported cases of feminization or masculinization of fish, and the increased incidence of breast and testicular cancers and alterations of male genital tracts among mammals. So there is some evidence showing that all these hormones we use do eventually get into our water, and as you can see, they get into our fish in the oceans and in our rivers. They end up affecting other mammals, and there's a chance that it even affects us. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about are greenhouse gases. And I argue that this is the last cause of water degradation. Animal agriculture is the #1 greenhouse gas emitter, accounting for 18% of total emissions. Second to that is transportation at 14%, meaning all cars, trucks, trains, and airplanes combined emit less greenhouse gases than livestock do. For a while, I wondered how this was possible, and if plants absorb CO2 and cattle turn those plants back into CO2, then cattle should be carbon neutral. I mean, makes sense to me. Turns out that cattle don't just turn plants into CO2. They ruminate the plants in their stomach, and those are broken down into methane. Methane is a chemical that traps 23 times more heat than the equivalent amount of carbon dioxide. Nitrous oxide, a product of nitrate and fertilizer breaking down in sunlight, has 296 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide, and livestock are responsible for 65% of nitrous oxide released by human activities. Livestock don't just emit greenhouse gases, they also prevent them from being absorbed. For example, the rainforests are called the lungs of our planet because they are one of Earth's major the rainforests are one of Earth's major carbon dioxide sequesters. But we've already cut down half the rainforest to make land for cattle to graze, who in turn take that CO2 that would have been sequestered and make it even more potent as methane. This again creates a positive feedback loop where the planet heats up more, causing desertification as well as severe and unpredictable weather. Desertification inhibits that area of land from being able to absorb any more CO2, and severe weather increases damage to ecosystems, inhibiting their ability to retain water. This in turn causes more desertification and more severe weather. And then all these greenhouse gases in turn end up also raising the average global temperature. Something that everyone here I think understands is causing glaciers to melt and sea levels to rise. This is a problem in and of itself since 70% of human populations live along the coasts, and it is expected that by 2050, global warming will kill